Everyone, this video is an introduction to the Fae, otherwise known as fairies. I'm going to refer to them as Fae because that's a more all-encompassing term with its origins in folklore. Fairies are a more modern, kind of narrow term, and this isn't a video about Disney-type fairies. As usual, I'd like to say I'm not an expert, but I do have an interest in this topic and I've done some research and I'd like to share it with you. So, what is a fairy or fae? In the folklore tradition, there were fairies in different countries and cultures, particularly Celtic. They're always mischievous, trickster creatures and often feared. People would try not to disturb, offend, or upset them. And the fae are not something you would go after or try and find or summon. The term fae incorporates the full range of creatures and the range of evil to good, and they don't like being called fairies. That's why we have lots of euphemisms such as wee folk, little people, good neighbours, fair folk, and so on. So the idea of fae comes from this tradition. Then we have the more modern Victorian, Edwardian, moving on to today, Disney-type fairy tradition. Here they look like human creatures with wings. They have magical powers such as Tinkerbell. We have the idea of fairy tales, fairy godmother granting wishes. And I wanted to mention here the Cottingley fairies as well. That's what this picture shows. So there were two girls, I think this was around 1912. They were cousins aged 11 and 16 who made these photos with fairies in them. And they presented them as if they were real photos, but at the end of their lives, they admitted that they were fake, except they said one of them was real. They said that they did see fairies, but they felt like unless they created these pictures, no one would believe them. So there's that story as well. Just the origin of the word fae. Fairy derives from Old French, and in Old French of fae was a woman skilled in magic who knew the power and virtue of words, stones, and herbs. There are different types of fae. We have brownies, which the Brownie Girl Guide group was named after, from Scotland. They would do all the household chores and people would leave milk to keep them happy because if they were offended, they would leave. Then there's more mischievous spirits called boggarts, also from Scotland, I believe. They're more malevolent and cause problems around the house. We also have pixies, imps, elves, gnomes, goblins, leprechauns. That's not an exhaustive list, but they're the most well-known ones. And also nymphs, which are nymphs, which are water spirits, and dryads, which are tree spirits. So you see these characters in literature as well. Shakespeare, Midsummer Night's Dream is all about the fairies with Puck and the Fairy Queen and magic potions and so on. You see the dryads in C.S. Lewis in the Chronicles of Narnia, and there's lots of references throughout literature. I just wanted to mention cryptozoology. So this is the study of unknown animals. It's considered a pseudoscience, although there are some scientists working in this field, and the creatures are called cryptids. They include Bigfoot, also known as Sasquatch, Loch Ness Monster, mermaids, and so on. Another type of fae is changelings. They are fairies left in the place of stolen humans. The theme of the swapped child is common in medieval literature and reflects concern over infants afflicted with unexplained diseases or disabilities, or even bad behaviour. They'd explain it as a changeling. And this is understandable when you think, peasant families would need children to be able-bodied and capable of working to support the family. Okay, fairy encounters. They are most likely in forests, woods, meadows, and gardens, anywhere in nature. Fairies will be in holes, piles of stones and branches, and these should not be disturbed. Trees that fairies like to live in include oak, ash, thorn or hawthorn, willow, rowan, birch. which brooms were made from, and witches' broomsticks. Hazel, which is good for magic wands, and also divining rods for dowsing, because it contains the energy of wisdom and protection. Fae love cats but fear dogs. They are particularly active at Beltane, which is the 1st of May, in the pagan calendar, the start of summer. They can appear as dancing lights in the night sky, particularly at sunset. They are repelled by iron, and there's the belief that giving them offerings wards off misfortune. Okay, now we have the idea of fairy paths. These are a route taken by fairies across the landscape. There are negative consequences for blocking these, such as by building a house or extension in the way. Consequences such as illness and misfortune for the inhabitants. I did read about a case where a corner of a cottage was removed because it blocked a fairy path. People will open their front and back door to allow the fairies to pass through, particularly at night when they march in processions, especially on the cross-quarter days, which are 1st of February, 1st of May, 1st of August, and 1st of November. So how do you know if your home or a building is blocking a fairy path? The tradition is to put stones on each corner of a floor plan overnight. If the stones don't move, then it's okay, you're not blocking a fairy path. If they do move, that part of the house is blocking them. Fairy paths are known as trods in Western England, and in nature they can appear as a different shade of green. Animals avoid these, and we shouldn't walk along them. Fairies are restless spirits, so they frequently move around the countryside. They have mass relocations on equinoxes and solstices. So there's a tradition of staying out of their way, not traveling on those days, and not letting children out after dark. Okay, fairy forts. These are the remains of Iron Age and early Christian stone forts and circles. According to local folklore, fairies defend them from destruction, so they're another thing that shouldn't be disturbed. There are stories about misfortune and curses on people who tried to destroy them, such as the financial ruin of developers in Kerry in 2017. There's also the idea of the Kennedy curse. So JFK, US president and prominent family in the US, they were a poor immigrant family from Wexford in Ireland, and it's believed, because a lot of misfortune has happened to the people in America, that a curse was placed on that family. The relatives, and they're still there, who stayed behind in Wexford prospered, but those who went to the USA didn't. There's one story that this is because they destroyed a fairy fort. There is another story that a Hebrew curse was placed on that branch of the family. So next we move on to fairy rings. There's pictures here. They are circular patterns in grass and meadows, usually made by mushrooms. There's a theory that they could be the top cone of a force of earth energy occurring under that site. Often stone monuments were built here in ancient times. They can be seen as dangerous to walk into or across, or fortunate. The general consensus is not to walk into them. They can be gateways into supernatural realms, or if you are going to walk into it, ask the fairies permission first and see what you sense as a response. You can leave offerings to fairies in the fairy rings, such as dairy. They really like dairy, and cheese, particularly fairies in Wales. Okay, now onto the topic of fairy trees. These are magical trees taken care of by the Fae, and it is their home. They are to be protected and feared. It is bad luck to disturb a fairy tree. Fairy trees are hawthorn or ash. Not every hawthorn or ash is a fairy tree. It's only if it is in the middle of a field. In Ireland and parts of the UK, farmers and developers will not cut them down. They'll often put stones around them to protect them. It's considered good luck to keep a fairy tree, and also to leave gifts for good fortune and healing for the fae under the tree. You often see them with ribbons tied to the branches as well. Some examples: in County Clare in Ireland, a motorway was built around a hawthorn fairy tree because a local folklorist said that that was where fairies met and gathered together, and she was believed. Also in Scotland, there was a road that was not widened for 70 years so they wouldn't disturb a fairy tree. Another idea is the tree of life. So that's a single tree that would be left in a field cleared for settlement, building villages and so on. People in the village respected the food and the shelter provided by the tree and were grateful for it. Druids did spells beneath the tree, and the tree was attributed with superpowers. Seeing the fae. Most often, they will appear out of the corner of your eye when you're walking through the forest or working in the garden, just a glimpse or a sense of them for a fraction of a moment. You will see them in nature. They're most active at liminal times, which are in between transitional times, such as dawn and dusk. Also, equinox, solstice, and cross-quarter days. They are the days, like I said, of the fairy processions. And there's a tradition to wash your eyes with dew on those days to see the fae. Offerings to fairies. Any offerings you give should be given in love and blessing, not to request something in return. The fae like us to respect and protect nature. They like cream or milk, honey, and alcohol, such as whiskey or mead. Fairies are in gardens. Every garden, no matter how small, has a guardian spirit of its own. So in your garden, if you have one, ask for the fae's help to make the most of your garden as a place of beauty that you can share. Okay, some history of the fae. Once every village had a wise woman or man who dealt with the fae. Such people were common in Britain and Ireland up until the end of World War I. This picture here shows the wise woman of Cladda in Ireland from 1913. So their job was to maintain the balance between the human and fairy world, to mediate with the spirits, to solicit their blessings for good harvests, to repair any damage done to their relationships with humans, and to heal and remove curses. They inherited the mantle of the ancient priests and priestesses of the pagan world, who became the witches of later ages, a name that comes from the Anglo-Saxon word Wicca, meaning wise one. A good relationship with the fae was essential for the well-being and prosperity of anyone who depended on the land for their livelihood. Fae were given offerings of milk on old standing stones, bread and salt in the corners of fields, cream in saucers left on the hearth, and were left part of the harvest. Spiritual guardians of villages, called the ward, gathered at dusk in their sacred places, still known as ward trees, ward hills, and ward stones, to guard villages. And that's what these pictures show. So here's a ward stone, and here's a map from somewhere in northern England that has ward stone, and here as well. So places still have that name. As we humans moved away from our close connection to the earth, we lost our link with the fae. We forgot how to see them and how to treat them. Stories of them persisted, but we diminished them in our imaginations into the tiny, cute creatures of nursery tales. Okay, so that's a really condensed version of all my research into the fae. If you want to do some further study, these are some resources I found really useful. On YouTube, there's a channel by Kate Hairgirl Ray. She has so much knowledge about the fae. I first heard her on an interview on the BR313 channel with Thomas Sheridan. She also has on her channel Neil Rushton, an archaeologist, and he's got lots of knowledge as well, and a website called ancientorigins.net. You may have heard of Erwin Saunders. He is a character. He's got a YouTube channel and he's actually a CGI artist. So he goes hunting for the Fae and has these CGI Fae creatures on his videos. But they're really popular and just enjoyable to watch. Books, you can do a lot of research on the internet into any topic, but there's no replacement for looking at books as well. So Catherine Briggs are the classic books about fairies, also Marjorie Johnson books and Brian Froud. There's great pictures in his books like this one here. Okay, hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for listening.